The last words my wife Sarah ever said to me broke my life in two. We were in a cold, white hospital room that smelled like bleach, and the only sound was the steady beeping of a machine that was losing its fight. She held my hand, her grip weak as a bird's wing. "Mark," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I have to tell you something. Liam, Liam isn't yours." The beeping machine, my own heartbeat, the whole world just stopped. My name is Mark, by the way, and this is the story of how my perfect family was built on a lie. I looked at the woman I'd loved for 20 years, the mother of my child, and saw a stranger. Through the window in the door, I could see my son, Liam, a good kid, my 16-year-old boy, pacing the hallway with his head down. My son. He had my last name. He had my old baseball glove. But he wasn't mine. Sarah's eyes were filled with tears and so much fear. I wanted to scream, to shake her and demand to know who, how, why. But I could see the life leaving her. I only had seconds left to speak to my wife. What do you even say to a ghost that's still breathing? I swallowed every ounce of anger and hurt that was burning in my throat. I squeezed her hand and leaned in close so she could hear me. "It's okay, Sarah," I lied. "He's my son. He'll always be my son. I love you." I saw a little bit of peace cross her face then, a final moment of rest. But it was mixed with something else. It was fear. Her breathing got shallow, like a tiny puff of air. She tried to say one more thing, to give me one last piece of the truth. Her lips formed a word, a name. It started with a D. "Duh," she breathed out. But that was all. Her eyes went wide just for a second, like she was trying to warn me about something terrible. And then, just like that, she was gone. The heart monitor let out one long, awful sound that I'll never forget. Nurses rushed in, but it was over. Sarah was gone. And I believed in that moment that she had taken the real truth with her to the grave. But I was wrong. She hadn't taken the secret with her. She had left it behind like a landmine, waiting for me to take one wrong step. The day we buried Sarah was cold and gray, which felt about right. I stood there by the hole in the ground, my arm wrapped tight around my son, Liam. He was trying his best to be strong for me, but he's just a kid, you know? Friends and family came by, patting my shoulder, saying how sorry they were. I just nodded, because words didn't work anymore. I kept scanning the crowd for my brother, David. He's my only brother, my only family now, besides Liam. But he wasn't there. He didn't show up for the church. He didn't show up for the burial. Nothing. Just as folks were starting to head to their cars, a shiny black Mercedes pulled up. My brother David stepped out, looking like he'd just come from a business meeting, not a funeral. Not a single wrinkle in his expensive suit. "Sorry I'm late, Mark," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "Got held up." But the way he looked past me, the way his eyes settled on Liam, it wasn't sadness. It wasn't sympathy. It was something else. It was the look of a man checking on an investment. A few days after we buried Sarah, my brother David showed up at my house. He just walked right in, holding a fancy leather briefcase like he owned the place. He sat at my simple kitchen table, looking completely out of place in his perfect suit. "Mark, I've been thinking," he said, his voice all smooth and serious. "You shouldn't have to worry about money right now. I want to pay off the house for you. And I want to set up a college fund for Liam, a big one, Ivy League. Now, you have to understand, my brother and I hadn't been close for years. He was the golden boy who made millions in the city, and I was the guy who stayed behind and worked with his hands. We only talked at Christmas and birthdays. So this big offer, it didn't feel like a brother helping a brother. It felt like a business deal. He kept looking over at the living room where Liam was doing his homework, like he was sizing him up. I knew in my gut this wasn't a gift. He wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to buy his way into my son's life. The question was, why? Having David in my house, in Sarah's kitchen, it shook something loose in my memory. It was from a Christmas party, maybe 5 years ago. The house was full of music and laughter. I'd walked into the kitchen to grab a drink, and I saw them, Sarah and David. They were in a corner, whispering hard and fast. It wasn't friendly. Sarah looked pale, and her hands were shaking. David looked angry. "You can't keep doing this, David," I heard her say, her voice cracking. "It's not right." Just then, they saw me standing in the doorway. They jumped apart like they'd been zapped with electricity. Sarah forced a smile so wide it looked painful. "Oh, Mark, we were just planning a little surprise for you." David just nodded, his face like a stone mask. Back then, I let it go. I let it go because I trusted my wife more than anything. But standing there in my quiet kitchen years later, I knew the truth. They weren't planning a surprise. They were keeping a secret. And a terrible thought started to grow in my mind. Maybe it was the same secret that got her killed. I couldn't sleep that night. That memory of the fight just kept playing over and over in my head. I went to the hall closet and pulled down our old, heavy photo albums. I just wanted to see Sarah's real smile again, from a time when things were simple. I flipped through the pages, seeing all of Liam's birthdays, his first t-ball game, our family trip to the Grand Canyon. Every picture was a little stab in the heart. I kept going back, further and further, to the time before Liam was even born. And that's when I found it. It was a picture from a weekend trip to the mountains. I was the one who took it. It was of Sarah and my brother David, standing in front of a waterfall. His arm was around her waist, which was normal enough, I guess. But the way she was looking up at him, it wasn't how you look at your husband's brother. It was a look I hadn't seen her give anyone else. It was a look filled with a secret I was never supposed to know. I stared at that photograph, and my blood ran cold. The problem wasn't new. It was ancient. It had been smiling right at me for 17 years. I must have been staring at that old photograph for a long time, because suddenly my son Liam was standing in the doorway. "Dad, you okay?" he asked, his voice quiet. I slammed the photo album shut like I'd been caught stealing. My heart was hammering in my chest. "Yeah, buddy, I'm fine. Just, you know, looking at old pictures of your mom." I tried to smile, but it felt like my face was made of cracked glass. Liam didn't buy it. Not for a second. He walked over and looked me right in the eye. "No, you're not," he said. "You've been acting weird ever since the funeral. Ever since Uncle David started coming around." The words hit me harder than a punch. He could see it. This amazing kid I had raised. He could see right through me. I was trying to protect him from this horrible secret, but my own pain was becoming a wall between us. I was a terrible liar. And looking into my son's worried eyes, I knew I had a choice. I could either bury this secret forever, or I could start digging for the truth, even if it meant destroying the only thing we had left. Later that night, sitting alone in the dark, I made my choice. I couldn't bury it. I couldn't live the rest of my life looking at my son and my brother and wondering, The idea that popped into my head was ugly, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. A DNA test. It felt like a betrayal. Like I was telling Liam that 16 years of being his dad didn't matter. But then I saw my brother David's smug face in my mind. I heard his fake offers of help. I remembered that secret look he shared with my wife. This suspicion was like a poison spreading through my veins, and it was making me a bad father. I couldn't be there for Liam, not really, while this was eating me alive. I had to know for sure. The moment I decided to do it, I felt something inside me change. The sad, grieving husband was gone. In his place was someone colder, someone with a purpose. I had a secret of my own now. My mission was simple: find out if my brother stole my life. The only question was how to do it without anyone ever knowing. The next morning, I knew what I had to do first. I had to push my brother away just to see how he'd react. I picked up the phone and called him. My voice was surprisingly steady. "Hey, David," I said. "Listen, I've been thinking about your offer to help with the house. I really appreciate it, man. But I think Liam and I just need some space right now. We're okay for the moment." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, the fake kindness was completely gone from his voice. "Don't be a fool, Mark," he said, and his voice was cold and sharp. "You're not thinking straight. You're emotional. You're in over your head, and you need my help." It wasn't an offer anymore. It was an order. He was telling me to stand down. I realized he wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to control me. He wanted me to take his money and shut up. My hand was shaking when I hung up the phone. That wasn't just brotherly advice. That was a threat. And it proved one thing for sure. My brother was hiding a very big secret, and he was scared to death I was about to find it. That night, after David's threat on the phone, I knew I couldn't wait. I had to move forward with my plan. I waited until the whole house was dark and silent. I stood outside my son Liam's bedroom door for a long time, just listening to him breathe. My heart felt like a traitor in my chest. What kind of a father does this? I whispered to myself. But the thought of David's cold voice pushed me forward. I quietly turned the knob and slipped into the room. The moonlight coming through his window showed me where it was. His hairbrush, sitting on his dresser next to a stack of books. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. It felt like I was breaking some sacred rule. I carefully pulled out a few strands of his hair, each one feeling like a piece of my own heart. I tucked them into a tiny plastic bag I'd brought from the kitchen. I stuffed the little bag deep into my pocket, and it felt as heavy as a stone. I had crossed a line. There was no going back. Now all I needed was a sample from the man I used to call my brother. Getting a sample from David was easier than I thought. He stopped by the next day, trying to act all friendly again, asking if Liam and I needed anything. It was all a show. He used the guest bathroom, and as soon as he left, I went in there and found his disposable razor in the trash. It was all I needed. I put it in its own little bag and hid it with the other one. The next morning, I told Liam I had to run some errands and drove to the next town over. I didn't want to go anywhere local where someone might recognize me. The lab was in a boring little strip mall, tucked between a pizza place and a laundromat. The sign just said, DNA Services. I walked in, my heart pounding. I filled out the papers with a fake name, John Miller. I felt like a spy in a bad movie. I handed the lady at the counter 3 sealed bags. One for me, one from Liam's hairbrush, and one from David's razor. Results will be emailed in 5 to 7 business days, she said without even looking at me. I walked out into the sunshine, but my world felt cold and dark. The clock had started ticking. In 1 week, an email would tell me if I was crazy or if my whole life was a lie. That week was the purest form of torture I've ever known. Every minute felt like an hour. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I helped Liam with his homework. But I was just a body going through the motions. My mind was in a fog, just waiting. Every single time my phone buzzed in my pocket, my heart would slam against my ribs. And then there was David. He called me every single day. "Just checking in, brother," he'd say, but his voice was tight. "Have you thought any more about my offer? It's the smart play here." I had to force myself to sound weak and confused. "I'm still thinking, David. It's just a lot right now." I had to keep him thinking I was a wreck, that I was no threat. It was the hardest acting job of my life. I felt like I was losing my mind, caught between my son's worried glances and my brother's prying questions. On the 7th day, I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at my laptop when the email finally arrived. The subject line was short and brutal. "Your results are ready." My hand was shaking so bad I could barely move the mouse. This was it. The truth was just one click away. I stared at the subject line on my laptop screen. "Your results are ready." The whole world just went quiet. The ticking of the kitchen clock sounded like a drum, and I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. For a long, crazy second, I thought about just deleting the email. I could close the computer, walk away, and live in the dark. At least in the dark. I could pretend I had a family. But it was too late for that. The not knowing was a sickness, and I needed the cure, no matter how much it hurt. My hand was trembling as I moved the mouse. The little arrow hovered over the link to the results. It was just a thin blue line of text, but it felt like a doorway to a different life, a life I never asked for. I took a deep breath and clicked. A document opened up, full of charts and numbers and big scientific words that made no sense to me. My eyes scanned the page, flying past all the jargon, just looking for the bottom line, and then I found it. A single, simple sentence at the very end of the report. The words were so clean, so simple, and they cut me right in half. The sentence next to my name, the name of the man who raised him, read, "Probability of paternity 0%. 0. Not a tiny chance. Not a maybe. Just a big, empty 0. The number just sat there on the screen, and I felt all the air leave my body. It was the sound of my life breaking apart. Every birthday party, every time I pushed him on a swing, every bedtime story I ever read to him, were they all a lie? It was a strange feeling, though. My first thought wasn't anger. It was a deep, cold fear of losing my son, because in my heart, nothing had changed. He was still my boy. But the pain came right after that. The pain of Sarah's lie. She had watched me for 16 years, loving this boy with my whole soul, and she knew the whole time. I stared at that 0 until my eyes burned. This test had answered one question, but it had torn open 100 more. The biggest one was still waiting for me in that email. If I wasn't his father, then who was? I closed my eyes, took a shaky breath, and prepared to open the second file. There was another attachment in the email, the one I had labeled Uncle. My hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as I clicked on it. The second report looked just like the first one, full of the same confusing charts and numbers. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I found myself praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Please, I thought, let it be a stranger. Let it be anyone else in the whole world. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page, to that same final sentence. I held my breath. My eyes landed on the words next to the name David. Probability of paternity 99.99%. I didn't yell. I didn't punch the wall. I didn't even breathe. I just sat there and stared at the screen as my world turned to ice. A perfect match. It wasn't just some random affair. It was my brother. My own brother. Suddenly, everything made a horrible kind of sense. The money, the secret fight I saw, him showing up at the funeral, the threats on the phone. Every lie and every secret from the last 17 years crashed down on me all at once. I finally understood. My wife's confession wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a war. For a few minutes, I just sat there in the dark, letting the ugly truth wash over me. The sadness was gone, and something new was growing in its place. It was a cold, hard anger. My first thought was to get in my truck, drive over to David's big house across town, and kick his door down. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break things. I wanted him to feel just a little bit of the pain that was ripping me apart. But then I thought of Liam. What would that solve? David is rich and powerful. He has a team of lawyers. He would just twist the story, tell everyone I was going crazy from grief. He'd paint me as an unstable father, and then he would try to take my son from me. I could see it all happening. So right there, in the dark, I made a different plan. I would pretend to know nothing. I would be the sad, broken little brother who needed his help. From that moment on, I put on a mask. I would let him think he was in control. He thought he had buried his secret with my wife. He didn't know that I was about to start digging. The next day, I made the hardest phone call of my life. I called David and invited him over for dinner, making my voice sound shaky and lost. I don't think Liam and I should be alone tonight, I mumbled. Of course, Mark. Whatever you need, he said, his voice full of that fake pity that made my stomach turn. Having him sit at our dinner table was pure torture. He was in my house, eating the food I cooked, smiling at my son. Every time he laughed, I wanted to flip the table over. He started talking to Liam about his future. "Don't you worry about college, kid," David said with a wink. "I'll make sure you get into the best school. Harvard, maybe." It was a clear shot at me, a reminder that he was the rich one, the successful one. I just sat there and played my part, nodding like a grateful fool. But for the first time, I was really watching him. I was studying him. And I could see the arrogance in his eyes as he looked at Liam. He wasn't just being a generous uncle. He was claiming what he believed was his. After David left that night, I waited until Liam was asleep. Then I went to the back of our hall closet and pulled down a dusty box. Inside was Sarah's old laptop. She hadn't used it for a couple of years, but I could never bring myself to get rid of it. It felt wrong to go through her things, like I was invading her privacy. But I had no choice. I had to understand how this happened. I had to know what she was thinking. I turned it on, and it slowly came to life. I clicked through her old files. There were pictures, recipes, emails to her friends. It was like a diary of a life that felt like a complete lie now. Then I saw it. A folder on the main screen named Finances. My heart started to beat a little faster. I clicked on it, but a little box popped up. Enter password. I tried everything. Our anniversary, Liam's birthday, the name of our first dog. Every single time, The same words flashed on the screen. Password incorrect. I leaned back in my chair, frustration burning in my gut. Whatever was in that folder, she had locked it up tight, which meant it was exactly what I needed to find. I sat there staring at the password box on Sarah's old laptop, feeling like I'd hit a brick wall. I had tried every important date, every name, every memory I could think of. Nothing worked. I was about to slam the computer shut when I closed my eyes, and the image of the hospital room came flooding back. I saw Sarah's face, her mouth trying to form that last, unfinished word. It sounded like she was trying to say, "Duh, David." But what if it wasn't a word? What if it was a clue? Then another memory hit me, this one from long, long ago. It was from our honeymoon. We were just kids, really. We found a little stray dog near our cabin, a mutt with one floppy ear and a goofy grin. Sarah fell in love with him instantly and gave him a big, important name. "His name is Apollo," she had said. It became our little joke, our secret. On a wild hunch, my fingers moved to the keyboard. I slowly typed the letters, Apollo. I held my breath and pressed enter. The password box vanished. The folder opened, and what I saw on the screen made all the blood drain from my face. My hand was shaking as I moved the mouse. The folder wasn't filled with love letters or secret diaries like I expected. It was colder than that. It was full of dozens of files, each one labeled with a month and a year. I clicked on the most recent one. It was a bank statement. But it wasn't from our little community bank down on Main Street. This was from some fancy private bank in the city, the kind of place I'd never even seen inside. I saw a deposit listed for $50,000. My eyes went wide. I quickly opened another file from the month before that. Another $50,000. I kept clicking, going back months, then years. It was the same amount every single month, like clockwork. I scrolled all the way back to the very first file and opened it. The date was from 17 years ago, just a few months before Sarah told me she was pregnant with Liam. That's when the payments had started. A steady stream of secret money. My wife had been keeping a secret fortune from me, and I had a million questions. But the biggest one was, who was paying her? For the next 2 days, I barely slept. I lived on black coffee and a burning need for answers. I sat at that laptop and spent every free second digging into the name on those bank statements. The money was coming from a company called North Star Holdings. At first, it was like chasing a ghost. The company had no real office, just a P.O. box in Delaware. It was a shell company, made specifically to hide who was really behind it. But I kept digging, searching through public business records online until my eyes burned. Late on the second night, I finally found it. An old business filing, a digital piece of paper from when the company was first created 17 years ago. I scrolled to the bottom of the document, and there it was. The name of the person who set up the company. It wasn't my brother's name. It was the name of my brother David's personal lawyer. My whole body went numb. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. This was a plan. A cold, calculated, long-term deal. My brother hadn't just cheated with my wife. He had been paying her. This wasn't a love affair. It was a business deal. And I had a horrible, sinking feeling that my son was the thing they had bought and sold. My mind was spinning. My brother had been paying my wife for 17 years. It was a business deal. But why? What was he paying for? I kept digging through Sarah's old laptop, desperate for an answer. I opened her email program and started looking through everything. Her sent messages, her inbox. It was all normal stuff. Emails to her sister, messages to friends. Then I saw a folder labeled Drafts. There was only one email inside. It was addressed to my brother, David. The date on it was from the week before Sarah went into the hospital for the last time. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read it. The words were a bombshell. "David," it said, "I can't do this anymore. The guilt is eating me alive. We have to tell Mark the truth. All of it. About Liam, about the money. He deserves to know. I'm telling him this weekend." She was going to confess. She was going to tell me everything. But she never sent it. She had her heart attack before the weekend even started. I stared at the screen, a cold, terrible thought creeping into my mind. Her death had been so sudden. But what if it wasn't just bad luck? What if my brother found out she was finally going to talk? I was so lost in my own dark thoughts that I didn't hear Liam come into the room. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked, and his voice made me jump. He was looking at me, then at the laptop, his eyes full of suspicion. "You're always on Mom's old computer. You're hiding in here all the time. I'm not a little kid. Just tell me what's going on." I looked into my son's face, the face I loved more than anything in the world, and I knew I had to lie. The real truth would break him in two. "It's nothing, buddy," I said, forcing a weak smile. "Just sorting out some of her old bills and accounts. It's just a lot of boring paperwork." He just stared at me. I could see the trust in his eyes fading away, being replaced by a look of hurt. "You never used to lie to me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my secrets. The silence he left behind was worse than any argument. I was trying to protect him, but I was losing him. David's lies were poisoning not just my past, but my future too. After Liam left, I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I needed real, solid proof. I needed something I could hold in my hand, something that would explain everything, so when the time came, Liam would understand. I went back to the secret bank statements on the laptop, searching for anything new. And then I saw it. It wasn't one of the regular $50,000 payments. It was a huge, one-time withdrawal from years ago. $250,000. The little note next to it said, "Property down payment." I dug deeper and found a file with an address. The street name meant nothing to me, but I knew the town. It was a small, quiet town up in the mountains, the place where Sarah had grown up, hours away from our home. I knew I had to go there. I told Liam I had to go sort out some of his grandmother's old things, another lie that felt like a stone in my gut. As I got in my truck and started the long drive up into the hills, I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. I was driving toward a secret my wife had kept her whole life. I had no idea what I would find, but I knew whatever it was, it would change everything. The drive up the mountain seemed to take forever. The town where Sarah grew up was small and quiet, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. I found the address from the bank records. It wasn't in town. It was down a long, winding gravel road that ended at a sparkling blue lake. And there it was. It wasn't some little fishing cabin. It was a beautiful, two-story log home with a huge deck and big windows looking out over the water. It was nicer than the house Sarah and I had built together. There was a for sale sign out front, and I recognized the realtor's name from years ago. On an impulse, I pulled over and called the number. A friendly voice answered. "Carol, it's Mark, Sarah's husband." Her voice turned sad. "Oh, Mark." I was so sorry to hear about Sarah. I mumbled a thank you. I'm calling about the lake house, I said. Oh, it's a wonderful property, she chirped. Your brother David is finally ready to sell it. He and Sarah kept it in such perfect condition over the years. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Your brother David. She said it so easily, like it was the most normal thing in the world. This wasn't Sarah's secret house. It was their secret house. I hung up the phone, my head spinning. I was about to get back in my truck and just drive away when the screen door of the house next door creaked open. An old man with a kind face and a big straw hat came out carrying a watering can. Beautiful day, isn't it? He called over to me with a friendly wave. I managed to wave back. Just looking at the house, I said, my voice hoarse. The old man smiled. Ah, you must be Sarah's other brother then. I'm Bill. Lived next to them for years. I just froze. Sarah didn't have another brother. He thought I was related to her, not married to her. Such a terrible shame what happened to her, he said, shaking his head sadly. She and David were just the loveliest couple, so happy when they were up here. Their boy, Liam, he just loved swimming in that lake. I just stood there nodding, my throat too tight to make a sound. He thought Sarah and David were a couple. He thought Liam was their son. This wasn't just a secret. This was a whole other life. They weren't just cheating, they were playing house. And I had a horrible, sinking feeling that in this story, I wasn't the betrayed husband. I was the other man. The long drive back down the mountain was a silent blur. My mind was a mess of anger and pain. I was completely and totally alone in this. My brother David was rich and powerful. He had a secret life, a secret house, and a whole town of people who thought he was a wonderful family man. What did I have? An old laptop and a story no one would believe. I couldn't win this by shouting and making a scene. David was a snake, and to fight a snake, you have to be smart and cold. Then I remembered the name from those company papers, the ones for North Star Holdings. It was the name of David's lawyer, the man who helped him build this whole world of lies. I knew I couldn't go to him for help, but a shark like that, he had to have enemies. He had to have rivals. When I finally got home, I went straight to my computer. I looked up David's lawyer, and then I started searching for the names of lawyers who had fought against him in court and won. I needed to find a shark of my own. After hours of searching, I found a name. A woman from the city who specialized in financial crimes. Her name was Evelyn Reed. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding. I was done digging for secrets. It was time to build a weapon. A few days later, I took a day off work and drove into the city. The office of the lawyer, Evelyn Reed, was in one of those giant glass buildings that looked like it was touching the clouds. I felt small and out of place in my work boots, like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. Evelyn was a woman about my age with sharp, intelligent eyes that didn't miss a thing. She didn't say she was sorry for my loss or offer me a cup of coffee. She just pointed to a chair across from her big desk. "You have 1 hour," she said, her voice all business. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about Sarah's last words, the DNA test, my brother David's strange behavior, the secret house, and the bank statements. The whole ugly, twisted story just poured out of me. When I was done, my throat was dry. She just sat there, tapping a pen on her desk, and her face gave nothing away. I thought she was going to tell me I was crazy. Instead, she leaned forward and asked a question I never saw coming. Mr. Miller, she said, did your wife have a life insurance policy? The question about life insurance caught me off guard. Yeah, I said slowly. A basic one. Through her old job. Nothing huge. Evelyn just nodded and made a note. I'll look into it, was all she said. The next few days of waiting were awful, almost as bad as waiting for the DNA results. Finally, her office called and told me to come back in. When I got there, she had a single sheet of paper sitting in the middle of her huge, empty desk. We got it, she said. She pushed the paper toward me. It was a copy of Sarah's life insurance policy. My eyes went right to the box that said beneficiary, the person who gets the money. My name, Mark, was there, but it had a thick black line crossed through it. Next to it, in neat printed letters, was a new name. It wasn't a person. It was the name of a trust. The North Star Trust, I read out loud. Evelyn nodded. And the only person who controls that trust, she said, is your brother, David. Then she pointed to the payout amount at the top of the page. $2 million. $2 million. The number just hung in the air. My wife dies, and my brother gets a check for $2 million. My mind started racing back to Sarah's unsent email, the one where she said she was going to tell me everything. Then I thought about her heart attack, how it came out of nowhere. He killed her, I whispered, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. He found out she was going to talk, and he killed her. Evelyn held up a hand, her voice firm and steady. Slow down, Mark. We can't prove that. But we don't have to. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp and focused. This insurance policy changes the entire game. Before today, you had a sad and messy family problem. Now, you have evidence of a crime. This is financial fraud. This is leverage. This is his weak spot. Hearing her talk like that, so cold and smart, it changed something in me. The fog of sadness I'd been living in finally cleared. All that was left was a feeling as hard and clear as steel. I wasn't a victim anymore. What's our next move? I asked. A tiny, thin smile crossed her face. Now, she said, we let the snake come to us. Following my lawyer Evelyn's advice, I went quiet. I stopped answering David's calls. When he sent a text message, I'd wait hours before replying with a single word. Okay. Fine. Busy. I was building a wall between us, brick by brick, and I could feel him getting angrier on the other side. A man like my brother cannot stand not being in control. Sure enough, a few days later, his fancy black car was sitting in my driveway. He didn't knock. He just walked right into my house. We need to talk, Mark, he said, and his friendly uncle mask was completely gone. He tried to stand over me to make me feel small like he always used to. I'm worried about you, he said, his voice low and hard. You're not thinking clearly. You're pushing me away when I'm just trying to help. It was the same old game, trying to make me feel weak and stupid. But this time I didn't look down at the floor. I looked him right in the eye. I've never thought more clearly in my life, David, I said, and my voice was calm and steady. The look on his face was a mix of pure shock and anger. He knew in that single moment that the sad, broken little brother he thought he could control was gone forever. My brother David is smart. I'll give him that. He knew he couldn't bully me anymore, so he changed his tactics. If he couldn't get to me, he would go around me and get to my son. It started with text messages sent straight to Liam's phone. Then a brand new video game console showed up at our front door, a big, expensive gift from Uncle David. I told Liam we had to send it back, and we had our first real shouting fight since Sarah died. "I don't get it, Dad," Liam yelled at me, his face red with anger. "Uncle David is just trying to be nice. Why do you suddenly hate him so much?" A few days later, David took it even further. He showed up right after school was out, driving a shiny new pickup truck, the exact kind of truck my 16-year-old son dreamed about. He parked it in our driveway, got out, and dangled the keys in front of Liam. He was trying to buy my son's love with expensive gifts. He was painting me as the mean, jealous father, and the worst part was, it was starting to work. Liam was looking at my brother with stars in his eyes, and I felt a cold wave of panic. That night, I watched Liam through the kitchen window. He was standing in the driveway, just staring at that new truck. The look on his face terrified me. It wasn't just about a truck. It was about the easy, wealthy life that my brother David could give him, a life that I never could. The DNA test had already proven that Liam wasn't my son by blood. But in my heart, that didn't matter. He was my son because I was the one who was there every single day. I taught him how to ride a bike and how to treat people with kindness. Now, I was facing the terrible possibility of losing him for real. Not losing him to science, but losing his respect and his love. I knew I had to tell him the truth about David. But how? It would be my word against his. David would just lie and say I was crazy with grief. Liam would be caught in the middle, totally torn apart. I needed more than just bank statements and a story about a secret house. I needed one final piece of evidence, a smoking gun so powerful and so undeniable that it would destroy my brother's world of lies forever. I just had to find it. My hunt for a smoking gun began in the one place I had been avoiding, the bedroom closet. Sarah's clothes still hung on her side, smelling faintly of her perfume. It was the saddest room in the world to me. But I knew if she had hidden something to protect herself, to protect us, it would be here. I went through old shoeboxes filled with birthday cards and dusty pockets of winter coats. Nothing. I was about to give up when my hand hit something hard and heavy in the back, tucked under a stack of old blankets. It was a small metal fire safe, the kind you open with a key. I had no idea where the key was. I carried the box out to the garage, my heart pounding. I took a deep breath and wedged a crowbar into the seam. My hands were sweating. I felt like a criminal, breaking into the last secrets of my own wife's life. With a loud crack, the lock gave way and the lid popped open. Inside, there wasn't much. Just some old passports, Liam's birth certificate, and a single, thick yellow envelope. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside the envelope, there was a folded letter, and underneath it was a tiny black digital voice recorder. I sat down on an old stool in the dusty garage, shut the door, and pressed the play button on the little recorder. First, there was a hiss of static, and then there was her voice. It was Sarah. But it was a version of her I had never heard before. Her voice was thin and shaky, and full of a terror that made my skin crawl. "If you're hearing this, Mark," she began, her words trembling, "it means I'm gone. And it means I was a coward. I was too scared to tell you the truth to your face. I sat there and listened as my dead wife told me everything. She said my brother David had been obsessed with her since before we were even married. She said he used his money and his power to back her into a corner, trapping her in an affair she never wanted. The money wasn't a gift, Mark. Her recorded voice cracked, full of shame. It was a cage. He paid me to keep me quiet. He paid me to own a piece of our lives. She wasn't a cheater. She was a prisoner. And as I listened to her story, the anger in my heart broke, and all that was left was a deep, terrible sadness for the woman I loved. I thought I had heard the worst of it, but the part that came next turned my blood to ice. Sarah's voice on the recorder was barely a whisper. "A few months ago," she said, "David made me change the life insurance policy. He sat right next to me and made me sign the papers that gave it all to him. I knew about the policy, but I didn't know why. Then she told me." Her voice was shaking so badly she could hardly speak. "He told me if I refused, he would ruin you, Mark. He said he would tell the world you were an unfit father. He would take you to court and prove he was Liam's biological dad, and he would use all his money and power to take our son away from you. He promised me you would never see Liam again." It was all there. A direct threat. Blackmail. This was the weapon my lawyer, Evelyn, had been talking about. This was the smoking gun. "I'm so sorry, Mark," was the last thing Sarah whispered, and then the recording ended. I sat there in the silent garage, clutching the small black recorder in my hand. The quiet, secret war was over. I wasn't just a sad husband anymore. I was a man holding a bomb, and I knew exactly where I needed to drop it. The next morning, I didn't drive to my brother's house with my fists clenched. I drove straight into the city with the little black voice recorder sitting on the passenger seat. I walked into Evelyn Reed's fancy office, put the recorder on her big, shiny desk, and said just 2 words. "Press play." She listened to the whole thing, her face never changing, like a statue. When Sarah's voice finally faded away, Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she looked up at me, her eyes sharp and clear. "This is it," she said. "This is the end of the game." She told me that a shouting match at my house wouldn't work. It had to be official. It had to be a trap. "We will call a formal family meeting," she explained, her voice all business. "We'll tell him it's to finalize the details of your wife's estate, to sign the papers." The plan was simple. We would get him into her conference room. He would walk in feeling arrogant and powerful, thinking he was in charge. He would have no idea he wasn't walking into a meeting. He was walking into a cage. My lawyer, Evelyn, told me that I had to be the one to call David. It had to sound real. I stood in my kitchen for 10 minutes, practicing what I would say, before I finally picked up the phone. My heart was pounding in my chest. "David," I said, making my voice sound tired and defeated. "It's Mark. Listen, Sarah's lawyer needs to have one last meeting to sign off on everything, including that trust fund for Liam. She said she needs both of us there." He took the bait so fast it was almost funny. "Of course, Mark. I was wondering when you'd finally get to it," he said, and his voice was filled with a fake pity that was really just him feeling superior. "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll be there to make sure everything is handled properly for the boy." He called my son the boy, like he was just a piece of property. He had no clue what was really waiting for him. He thought he was coming to claim his prize. After I hung up, my legs were shaking so badly I had to sit down. The trap was set. In 2 days, the bomb my wife left behind was finally going to go off. The morning of the meeting, the air in our house was thick and heavy. Liam and I ate breakfast in total silence. He just pushed his cereal around in his bowl with a spoon, looking up at me every few seconds. He knew something was wrong. "Dad, why do I even have to go to this lawyer thing?" he asked, his voice low. "It's just boring adult stuff." I looked at my son, at his trusting 16-year-old face. How do you tell your child that his entire life has been a lie? How do you prepare him for a pain that you know will change him forever? The words just wouldn't come out. All I could do was reach across the table and put my hand on his. "Liam," I said, my voice thick, "no matter what happens today, and no matter what you hear in that room, I need you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. You are my son. Always." He just stared at me, his eyes wide with confusion and a little bit of fear. "It's time to go," I said, standing up from the table. We were about to walk into that lawyer's office as a father and son. I was terrified we wouldn't walk out the same way. The elevator ride up to Evelyn Reed's office on the 30th floor was the quietest ride of my life. Liam stood beside me, staring at his shoes, and I just stared at the numbers lighting up above the door. My whole world, and my son's, was about to be decided in the next hour. We walked into a big, cold conference room with a long, shiny table. And my brother David was already there, sitting at the head of the table like a king on a throne. He glanced at his expensive watch. "There you are," he said, his voice full of impatience. "Let's get this over with." My lawyer, Evelyn, walked in behind us and closed the heavy wood door. The click of the lock sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. Her professional smile was gone. Her face was like stone. "We will, David," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "We have a lot to get through." David just laughed, a short, ugly sound. He leaned back in his big leather chair, full of arrogance. He had no idea. He didn't realize he wasn't in a meeting. He was in a cage. Evelyn sat down, opened a folder in front of her, and looked right at my brother. "Let's start," she said, "by talking about the house on the lake." David's smug smile twitched for just a second. "Ah, the investment property," he said, waving his hand like it was nothing. "I was helping Sarah with it. A little project." Evelyn didn't even blink. "A project?" she asked. "That's funny. The neighbors said they thought Sarah and a Mr. David Miller were a lovely couple who lived there on the weekends." David's face turned red. "They're just gossiping old fools," he snapped. Evelyn ignored him and slid a thick stack of papers across the table. They stopped right in front of him. "Then perhaps you can explain these," she said. "Bank statements. $50,000 a month, every month, for 17 years, from your company into a secret account belonging to Sarah." My son Liam, sitting next to me, let out a tiny gasp. David pointed a shaking finger at me. "I was supporting her," he snarled, "because he couldn't. I was taking care of my family." His voice was loud, but his eyes were scared. He was a cornered animal. Evelyn just let him rant for a moment, and then she slid another single piece of paper across the table. "And I suppose this," she said quietly. "Was you taking care of family too?" David looked down at the paper. I knew what it was. It was the life insurance policy. His face went from red with anger to a pale, sickly white. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. $2 million, David," Evelyn said, her voice like a razor. "A few months before Sarah died, the beneficiary on her life insurance policy was changed from her husband to a trust that you and only you control." David completely lost it then. "She wanted me to have it," he screamed, slamming his fist on the table so hard the water glasses jumped. "She knew he couldn't handle it. She wanted me to take care of Liam." My son, who had been frozen this whole time, finally turned to me. His voice was a small, broken whisper. "Dad," he said, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Dad, what is she talking about? What's going on?" I looked at my son's terrified face, and I knew the next thing said in this room would either save him or destroy him forever. I knew right then that there was no turning back. All the lies had to stop. I looked at my son, Liam, and my heart broke for the pain I was about to cause him. "Liam," I said, my voice thick with a sadness so deep I could barely speak. "There's something you need to see." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded papers from the DNA lab. My hand was shaking so badly as I unfolded them and laid them on the shiny table right in front of him. Liam stared down at the papers, afraid to touch them. He knew this was it. This was the secret that had been choking our family. My brother David finally stopped yelling. The whole room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. With a trembling hand, Liam reached out and picked up the report. He read the first line, the one next to my name. "Probability of paternity, 0%, he whispered, his voice full of confusion. He looked up at me, his eyes begging me to make sense of it all. "I don't understand," he said. I pointed to the bottom of the page. "Keep reading, son." I watched my son's face as the final truth hit him. It was like watching a building crumble in slow motion. All the color drained from his face, his mouth fell open, and a little gasp of pain escaped his lips. He dropped the report on the table like it had burned his fingers. He slowly turned his head and stared at the man he had always called his uncle. Liam's eyes, which were usually so kind and bright, were now cold and hard. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice shaking with a rage I had never heard from him before. My brother David looked at the fury on Liam's face and knew the game was over. All the smooth lies just melted away, leaving only the ugly truth. "It's true," he screamed, his voice raw and hateful. "And you know what? Your mother was glad. She knew I was the better man. She was tired of this pathetic little life he gave her." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "He was never good enough for her. He was never man enough to be her husband. Or your father." The terrible words just hung there in the air, poisoning everything. David just kept yelling, spitting out 20 years of jealousy and hate. He was trying to justify what he did, trying to paint himself as the hero. While he was ranting, I calmly reached into my other pocket. I pulled out the little black voice recorder that Sarah had left for me. I looked across the table at my brother, his face all red and twisted with anger. "You're right, David," I said, my voice quiet and clear. "Sarah did know exactly what kind of man you were." And then I pressed the play button. The conference room fell silent. The only sound was my wife's terrified voice filling the air. It was the end of the recording, the part where she described how David had threatened her, how he had blackmailed her into changing the life insurance policy, how he had promised to destroy me and take Liam away from me forever. As Sarah's shaky voice described his cruelty, all the color drained out of David's face. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the empty, hollow look of a man who was completely and utterly defeated. The recording ended. David was broken. But now the hardest part began. What was my son going to do? The silence in that big, fancy conference room was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My brother David sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. My lawyer, Evelyn, was quiet. Everyone in that room was looking at my son, Liam. Everyone was waiting to see what the 16-year-old boy who had just had his whole world ripped apart would do. Liam had been shaking, but now he stood up. The sound of his chair scraping against the wood floor was loud and sharp. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at David, the man who was his biological father. The look on my son's face wasn't sad or confused anymore. It was just cold, hard disgust. He looked at David like he was something you'd find on the bottom of your shoe. Then, without a single word, Liam turned his back on him. He walked slowly around the long, polished table, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. He came and stood right behind my chair. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed, hard. It was a simple thing, just a hand on my shoulder. But it was the most powerful thing I have ever felt in my life. He didn't need to say a word. I knew what it meant. It meant, "You are my father." I reached up and put my own hand on top of Liam's. With my son standing behind me, a pillar of strength, I felt like I could do anything. I looked over at my lawyer, Evelyn, and I gave her a small nod. It was time to end this for good. Evelyn slid a new stack of papers and a pen in front of my brother. "Here is what is going to happen now, David," she said, and her voice left no room for argument. "First, you will sign over every single penny of that $2 million life insurance policy to a new trust for Liam. My client, Mark, will be the one in charge of it." She pushed another paper toward him. "Second, you will sell the lake house and give all of the money to Mark to make up for the damages you have caused. And third," she said, her voice like ice, "you will sign this document, legally giving up all your parental rights to Liam. You will agree to never see him or speak to him ever again." David stared at the papers, his face gray. "Or what?" he whispered. Evelyn held up the little black voice recorder. "Or this," she said. "Go straight to the police." David just sat there, staring at the papers, then at the recorder, then back again. He looked at me and at Liam standing behind me like a silent guard. My brother was a king who had just lost his entire kingdom. He had no moves left to make. With a hand that trembled, he picked up the pen. He didn't even read the papers. He just signed his name on every line Evelyn pointed to. His signature, which was usually so big and confident, was now just a weak, shaky crawl. He pushed the signed papers back across the table and stood up. His expensive suit looked wrinkled and old. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, empty stare. He walked to the conference room door, but before he left, he turned and looked right at me. His eyes were not empty anymore. They were filled with a pure, black hatred that chilled me to the bone. "You think you've won," he whispered, his voice like a snake's hiss. "This isn't over." And then he was gone. We had won. The money was safe, the lies were exposed, and my son had chosen me. But as the door clicked shut, his final threat echoed in the silent room. Was he right? Was this really the end? Or was it just the beginning of something much, much worse? We walked out of that tall glass building and into the bright afternoon sun. It felt like we had been in that dark conference room for a lifetime. We had won. My brother David was beaten, but I didn't feel like celebrating. I just felt tired, a deep-down exhaustion that went right into my bones. The drive home was the quietest car ride I've ever had with my son. The radio was off. We just watched the trees and the other cars go by. What do you even say after that? We had just blown up our family. Now we had to try and live in the wreckage. I wanted so badly to ask him if he was okay. I wanted to tell him that everything would be all right, but the words felt like cheap, empty lies. Nothing was okay. I pulled the truck into our driveway, and before I could even turn off the engine, Liam finally spoke. He didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead through the windshield. "Can we just not talk about it tonight, Dad?" he asked, his voice so quiet I could barely hear him. I just nodded. Yeah, buddy, we don't have to talk. We walked into our house, a house that was suddenly full of ghosts. The next few weeks were harder than the fight in the lawyer's office. The silence from the car ride just spread out and filled up our whole house. Liam and I were like two ghosts, haunting the same rooms, trying not to bump into each other. I'd make dinner, and we would eat at the kitchen table without saying a single word. He spent most of his time in his room with the door shut. That easy friendship we always had, that bond between a father and son, was just gone. It had been broken, and I didn't know how to fix it. The ugly truth was like a third person living with us. A big, unwanted guest who sat at our table and watched our every move. Every picture of Sarah on the wall, every memory of a family vacation was now tainted. I had fought so hard to win, to protect my son. But now I stood on the other side of the war, and I had no idea how to reach him. I was starting to get a deep, cold feeling of fear in the pit of my stomach. I had saved him from a liar, but what if, in the process, I had lost my son forever? One night, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs to get a glass of water, and I saw him. Liam was sitting at the dark kitchen table, just staring at a framed picture of him and his mom when he was a little kid. I didn't turn on the light. I just pulled out the chair across from him and sat down in the darkness. We sat there in silence for a long time. I could hear him sniffling. Finally, he spoke, his voice all choked up. Was she happy? He asked. Sarah. Was she happy with you? It broke my heart that he couldn't even call her mom. I had to give him the real, messy truth. For a long, long time, Liam, we were very happy, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. But people are complicated. Life gets hard, and sometimes people get lost. I think your mom got lost for a while. He was quiet, and I could just feel him thinking about that. Then he looked at me, and in the dim light from the window, I could see the tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, Dad, he whispered. It was the first time he'd called me that in weeks. I was so surprised by what Liam said that I didn't know how to respond. Sorry? I asked, my voice gentle so I wouldn't scare him away. Buddy, what could you possibly be sorry for? None of this is on you. He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his sweatshirt. For being mad at you, he mumbled. And for being the reason everything is so messed up. And then it hit me. This poor kid, my son, was blaming himself for the sins of the adults around him. He thought he was the problem. I reached across the dark table and put my hand on his shoulder. Hey, you listen to me, I said, and my voice was firm, but I hope he heard all the love I had behind it. You are not the reason for any of this. This is about me, and your mom, and him. It has nothing to do with you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Liam. You are my son. That is the only truth that matters. Do you understand me? He looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, a real, watery smile touched his lips. He nodded. Yeah, Dad, he said. I understand. That late-night talk changed everything. The silence in the house was finally gone. The next morning, Liam and I were actually laughing about something stupid at the breakfast table. It felt normal. For the first time, I let myself believe that the war was over and that we were going to be okay. Then the mail came. Tucked between a phone bill and a pizza coupon was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It had the name of a fancy law firm I'd never heard of embossed in the corner. My stomach immediately twisted into a knot. I opened it with shaking hands. The words were big and complicated, but the meaning was simple and brutal. It was from a new lawyer my brother David had hired. He was suing me. He was claiming that he had signed the papers in Evelyn's office under duress, which is a legal way of saying we forced him and blackmailed him. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the letter was the real reason for it all. He was suing for visitation rights. He was going to take us to court to try and force his way back into Liam's life. My first call was to my lawyer, Evelyn. I was shouting into the phone, reading her the letter. Can he do this? Can he actually win? I yelled, pacing back and forth in my kitchen. Evelyn was calm, as always. He can try, Mark, she said, her voice steady as a rock. He's going to go to a judge and say he's a grieving father who just found out he has a son. He will paint you as the angry husband who is trying to keep them apart. He thinks we'll be afraid to fight back in public. He wants to keep this a family secret. She paused, and I could practically hear her thinking. So, she continued, her voice turning hard as steel, we do the one thing he isn't expecting. We make it public first. We take the fight to him. It's time to stop defending and start attacking. She laid out the plan. We would walk into the police station. We would give them the audio recording of Sarah describing David's threats. We would officially file a criminal complaint against him for coercion and fraud. I knew what that meant. Our family's deepest secrets would be in the newspapers for everyone to see. It was a choice. Fight a private war we might lose, or launch a public one that would burn everything to the ground. I hung up the phone with Evelyn and looked at my son. Liam had been standing in the doorway, and he had heard everything. His face was pale. This is your call too, Liam, I said, my voice quiet. If we do this, everyone in town will know our business. It will be messy. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I didn't see a scared kid anymore. I saw a young man who was tired of being a victim. He won't stop, will he, Dad? He asked. I shook my head. No, I don't think he ever will. Liam took a deep breath. Then let's finish it, he said. The next day, the three of us, me, Liam, and Evelyn, walked into the police station. I handed the detective the little black voice recorder. It felt like I was finally letting Sarah rest. It all happened fast after that. The story broke on the local news. Local businessman David Miller accused of fraud and blackmail. His smug picture was plastered everywhere. A few days later, we saw it on TV. News cameras showed my brother David being led out of his big, fancy office in handcuffs. He looked so small and pathetic without his money and power. The king was finally off his throne. The next few months were a blur of headlines and lawyers. David knew he couldn't win. That little recorder had him trapped. He took a deal with the prosecutors and was sentenced to a few years in prison. It wasn't as long as I wanted, but he was gone. He was finally out of our lives. The quiet that settled over our house was a relief at first, but the house itself was still full of ghosts. Every room held a memory that was now sad and complicated. We can't stay here, Dad, Liam said to me one night, and I knew he was right. We put the house up for sale. Packing up 16 years of a life into cardboard boxes is a hard thing to do. We went through old photo albums and trinkets, deciding what to keep and what to let go of. It felt like we were choosing which parts of our past were real and which parts had been a lie. The day the moving truck pulled away from our old street for the last time, It was one of the saddest and happiest days of my life. We weren't just leaving a house. We were leaving the whole ugly mess behind and searching for a fresh start. We just drove. For 2 weeks, we were just two guys in an old pickup truck, watching America roll by. We saw cornfields in Iowa and the great, wide-open plains of Nebraska. We saw the Rocky Mountains for the first time, their snowy tops looking like they were holding up the sky. And in the quiet cab of that truck, with the windows down and the radio playing low, we started to talk again. He asked me about the day he was born. I told him stories about his mom, the good stories, from before everything went wrong. We were rebuilding our family, 1 mile at a time. One night, we were sitting by a campfire at a campsite in Wyoming, looking up at more stars than I'd ever seen. It was completely quiet. "You're a good dad, you know that?" Liam said, his voice soft. And those few words, they were better than winning any fight. They were the only truth that ever really mattered. I knew then, sitting under all those stars, that we were going to be okay. He was my son, and I was his dad. We had found our peace, but we were about to learn that the past is never truly finished with you. We finally found a small, quiet town in Colorado to call home, a place with clean air and a little lake where we could go fishing. Liam started at the local high school and actually made a few friends. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, things were just normal. We had our peace. The war was over, and we had survived. About a year after we moved, I was sorting through the mail and found a strange envelope. It was thick and made of fancy paper, and it had all these foreign-looking stamps on it. It was from a law firm in Zurich, Switzerland. My hands were a little shaky as I opened it. The letter, in very formal English, said that my wife, Sarah, had opened a private safety deposit box there many years ago, and since I was her husband, I was now the one in charge of it. I was about to dismiss it as some kind of weird mistake, but it was the very last sentence of the letter that made my blood run cold. It said the box contained documents related to an international investment company that they now believed was connected to the recently exposed criminal activities of Mr. David Miller. I was wrong. The story wasn't over. My wife had one last secret, and it was hidden halfway across the world. I stood there in my new kitchen, in my new life, holding that letter from Switzerland. My mind started to spin with all the possibilities. More secrets, more lies, maybe even more money. For a second, I felt that old anger start to bubble up again, that old need to dig and dig until I had every last piece of the truth. But then I looked out the kitchen window. I saw my son, Liam, in our little backyard, throwing a football with a new friend from school. He was laughing. A real, happy, carefree laugh. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from him in years. He was finally free from the shadows of our old life. And in that moment, I knew. Chasing after more of my brother's dirty secrets wouldn't heal us. It would just drag us both right back into the darkness. My brother David thought that family and love were things you could buy, things you could own. He was wrong. The real treasure wasn't sitting in some bank box in Switzerland. It was right here, in this little house, in the sound of my son's laughter. I folded the letter and put it away in a drawer. Our story, the one that really mattered, was finally over. We had survived. When you strip it all down, this whole story was about a choice. It wasn't about DNA or money or even the lies. It was about what really makes a man a father. Is it blood, the thing you are born with? Or is it love, the thing you choose to give? Every single day, especially when it's hard, All the pain we went through, it all came down to that simple question. So I have to ask you, if you were in my shoes, after learning the devastating truth, what would you have done? Would you have walked away from the boy who wasn't yours by blood? Or would you have stayed and fought for the son who was yours by heart? It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer. Let me know what you would have chosen in the comments below. I really want to know what you think. Every single one of us has a story about being let down, or a time when we had to choose to love against all odds. If you believe that the family you build is more important than the family you're born into, then like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's build a community where we know that our stories matter, because we're always stronger when we tell them together.